Having been overshadowed by embargoes and political confrontation for many years, Havana's unexpected confirmation that it is conducting dialogues with Washington has become a shock to the entire world. In a message broadcast on national television, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel stated that his government has organized exchanges with U.S. representatives, with the primary objective of identifying bilateral issues that need to be resolved based on their severity and impact. According to him, the discussions also aim to seek feasible solutions for identified problems while assessing each side's goodwill in implementing specific actions for the benefit of the people of both countries. This statement is considered a notable signal in the context of Cuba-U.S. relations, which have experienced many ups and downs and frequently fallen into a state of tension. Observers note that Havana's public admission of these dialogues shows that, despite profound differences in politics and systems, the two sides still maintain certain diplomatic channels to manage disagreements and seek possibilities for cooperation. This reflects the reality that even during the coldest periods of their relationship, the need for dialogue between the two neighboring nations has not completely disappeared, but continues to exist as a necessary tool to avoid escalating confrontation and maintain a minimum level of stability in bilateral relations. Havana's declaration regarding the maintenance of dialogue with Washington did not emerge in a political vacuum, but rather against the backdrop of Cuba facing a comprehensive crisis rarely seen in decades. Economic and social difficulties, along with structural issues of the system, are surfacing simultaneously, creating immense pressure on President Miguel Díaz-Canel's administration. This very reality makes any diplomatic signal between Havana and Washington carry significance beyond the scope of ordinary bilateral relations. First and foremost is the increasingly visible economic crisis. Following the COVID-19 pandemic, the Cuban economy fell into a prolonged period of decline. The gross domestic product, GDP, of this Caribbean island nation has dropped sharply in recent years, while key foreign currency revenue sources have continuously weakened. One of the greatest shocks was the collapse of the tourism industry, a sector long considered the lifeline of the Cuban economy. When the pandemic paralyzed international tourist flows, Havana's foreign currency reserves nearly ran dry. Consequently, a series of supporting economic sectors, from services and transportation to domestic trade, also fell into stagnation. The energy crisis has further darkened the economic picture. Cuba depends significantly on imported oil, particularly from Venezuela, while domestic energy production capacity remains limited. Disruptions in fuel supply for many months have left thermal power plants without enough fuel to operate stably. Widespread power outages have thus become a familiar phenomenon for the Cuban people recently. Many areas face rolling blackouts lasting many hours a day, seriously affecting production, daily life, and essential services such as hospitals and food preservation systems. Economic hardships have quickly transformed into increasingly evident social pressures. Over the past few years, more than 1 million Cubans, equivalent to over 10% of the population, have left the country, primarily seeking routes to the U.S. or other Latin American nations. This is considered the largest wave of migration from Cuba since the post-Soviet era. For many citizens, leaving the island is not just a personal choice, but also an expression of lost confidence in domestic economic prospects. At the same time, shortages of basic goods have become increasingly common. Food, medicine, and many essential items are frequently in short supply. People must wait in long lines in front of state stores to purchase food or basic consumer products. Meanwhile, high inflation has caused the purchasing power of the peso to plummet, making life more difficult than ever for many families. The growing gap between those with access to foreign remittances and those entirely dependent on state wages has also increased the sense of inequality within Cuban society. However, many analysts argue that current difficulties stem not only from recent economic shocks, but also from structural problems within the development model. For decades, the Cuban economy has operated primarily under a centrally planned model, with the state sector playing a dominant role. Although Havana has implemented some reforms to expand the private sector and attract foreign investment, these steps have often been slow and inconsistent. Reforms have been deployed piecemeal, sometimes reversed or restricted by tight administrative regulations. As a result, the Cuban economy maintains an inflexible structure, heavily dependent on the state sector and lacking incentives for innovation. Small private enterprises are permitted to operate in certain sectors, but still face numerous barriers regarding finance, legal frameworks, and market access. In this context, the economy's resilience remains limited, especially when facing external shocks such as the pandemic or energy market fluctuations. In addition to internal factors, the role of the U.S. in Cuba's current crisis is an issue that cannot be ignored. Relations between the two neighboring nations have been dominated by Washington's economic embargo for over 6 decades. This sanctions system not only restricts direct trade between the two countries, but also creates many barriers to Cuba's international financial activities and investment. In recent years, U.S. policy toward Havana has continued to undergo many fluctuations. Under President Donald Trump, Washington restored and expanded many sanctions, including travel restrictions, tightening remittances, and imposing further financial measures on entities related to the Cuban government. These moves significantly reduced the flow of foreign currency into the island's economy. When President Joe Biden took office, some restrictions were eased, particularly in the areas of remittances and migration. However, most of the fundamental sanctions framework remains in place. This forces Cuba to continue operating in a severely restricted international economic environment. Accessing the global financial system, attracting foreign investment, or expanding trade has become more difficult compared to many other countries in the region. In this context, Cuba has fallen into a state of relative economic and financial isolation. Traditional partners like Venezuela also face their own difficulties, while support from other powers like Russia or China has not been sufficient to fill the economic gaps left by the embargo and internal crisis. Therefore, every signal of dialogue with Washington is closely monitored by observers, as it could directly relate to the possibility of easing some of the pressures weighing heavily on Cuba's current economy and society. The economic and social pressures surrounding Cuba are often explained by external factors, especially the long-standing U.S. embargo. However, many observers believe that the current crisis cannot be viewed solely from a geopolitical perspective. Within the Cuban economy itself, there are structural limitations that have accumulated over many years and are becoming increasingly apparent amid the crisis. Under President Miguel Díaz-Canel, Havana has taken some steps toward economic reform. However, these processes have yet to yield clear results. One of the biggest bottlenecks lies in the expansion of the private economic sector. The Cuban government has allowed the formation of small and medium-sized enterprises in some service and trade sectors, yet this sector must still operate within a framework of strict state control. Many private businesses face difficulties in accessing capital, importing raw materials, or expanding their business scale. This prevents the private sector, which was expected to become a new growth engine, from reaching its full potential. Therefore, Cuba's current crisis is seen as the result of both factors: external pressure and long-standing internal limitations. This realization also gives the dialogues between Havana and Washington more significance than a standard diplomatic move. Analysts suggest at least 3 possible scenarios arising from this contact process. The first possibility is that relations between the two countries could gradually cool down. In this scenario, dialogue helps both sides manage disagreements better, opening up small agreements in less sensitive areas such as migration, humanitarian aid, or regional cooperation. Such limited but stable steps could create a more favorable environment for Cuba to reduce economic pressure. The second possibility is that the dialogue is tactical, primarily aimed at handling immediate difficulties, especially the energy crisis that is seriously affecting the lives of the Cuban people. In that case, exchanges may focus on pragmatic solutions to ensure fuel supply or maintain minimal cooperation channels. However, a more cautious scenario also exists. Dialogue may stop at the level of diplomatic signaling without leading to significant changes if Cuba's core economic issues are not addressed. Many experts argue that even if relations with the U.S. improve, the Cuban economy will find it difficult to recover sustainably without conducting deeper domestic reforms.